I'm Lebohang Kganye, an artist from Johannesburg, South Africa. I mainly work in photography, but I also incorporate my different interests, such as theatre, my interest in performance, my interest in literature, but also mainly my interest in sculpture. So I will start by speaking about one of my earliest bodies of work to also contextualize how this exhibition came about. So one of my earliest bodies of work is Falaka, Her Story, and it's a work that I made in 2013. And the work really started with, it started because of the loss of my mother. So I was looking through our family photo albums, or particularly looking at her photo albums, and realized that a lot of the clothes that she was wearing when she was around the same age that I was, still in her wardrobe. And so I then started to trace where these photographs had been taken and basically restage them wearing the exact same clothes as her. And so this really becomes a sort of starting point for how I've approached my practice. And by that I mean, I started to think about the fact that there wasn't a single photograph of my mother in her factory worker's uniform. So, so this book now, being this family photo album or her albums that have now come to represent who she was, are basically a space where, she basically was performing as this woman that's always dressed to the T, and so I started to also think about this idea of labor, but also this idea of, of how family photos are also like a space of performance, but also thinking about how photography also becomes like not just, a sort of marker of a memory, but also a marker of fantasy. And so I've been thinking very much about this idea, or this proximity between memory and fantasy. So yeah, and so this becomes a starting point. And then the later works, or the works that then come after this body of work, become about this sort of trace of the family name. So I've spent a few years researching my family name Kganye. And so I traveled around South Africa, trying to locate family members around South Africa, and and basically trying to research my family name, and because it's spelled in these 4 different ways, Kganye, and Kganye means light. And so what you see is a continuation of like this research around my family name. And so I then collected family photo albums, but also did interviews with family members around our family name, but also thinking around language, thinking about our clan names, thinking about Izithakazelo. And so the work that then comes later, which is the work that you see in this space, Keep the Lights Faithfully, becomes a work that comes about when I was thinking about light, particularly lighthouses. Because I'd sort of come across some books that were speaking about female lighthouse keepers from the 18th century, 19th century. And it seemed like, mythology, but it was real. And so I discovered that in the 18th, 19th century, there'd been at least over 200 female lighthouse keepers in Europe, between Europe and the US. And I then started to do research whether there'd been female lighthouse keepers in South Africa. So we then visited all the current lighthouse keepers that are still in service around South Africa and interviewed them about their memories, what they do, what has been shared with them, because some of them, it becomes like a job that almost gets passed on. So if your dad was a lighthouse keeper, then you automatically also become a lighthouse keeper. And so the work is really based on their stories that they shared with me about life in the lighthouses, basically, and they're sort of the different shipwrecks, different ghost stories, saving people, all of that. So what I also didn't mention is how I arrive at a point of working with cardboard cutouts. So when I finished my photography studies, I worked for about 2 years on set, so on like television productions, right? And I became really interested in set design. So I spent a lot of time engaging with the set designers, but also just like trying to what can I say, familiarize myself with that visual language. And so this is between 2011 and like 2013. So this is really at a time when, so at that moment then I started to bring that element into my practice. So it was because I was actually working on television productions. So I then started to build these cardboard cutouts then in my studio and perform in front of them. And this is when I started doing the research around my family history. So all these stories that my family were telling me, particularly around my grandfather, I would then create these cardboard cutout sets that reference that story, and then I would then perform as my grandfather, wearing a suit similar to the one that he was wearing in his photos, and reenact the story that my family had told me. So I was really bringing that language of like television or like or theater into my work in that way. And then I then started to work smaller scale when I started working with the dioramas years later. But that's really how my work started, with the cardboard cutouts. So I remember how the diorama actually started. It started with me thinking about a room, right? So almost like thinking about, like dollhouses almost. So it was really, the format was meant to almost be like a maquette situation. And then I think much later I was like, this could actually become its own artwork. And I think for me, I think the idea of where your eyes go is, it's something that I can't control. I think that in the same way that whether it's large format or it's small format, your eyes get attracted to whatever they get attracted to. So it's not something that I can necessarily control. I do think, however, that there is an intimacy with the diorama that is quite different to like a larger format of the work, that it forces you to go inside and almost be, almost be part of the story in a different way to like a large format installation, which also does invite you in, but it's a different sort of experience, I think, of the work. I'm Lebohang Kganye, an artist from Johannesburg, South Africa.